5.
Chris. The topic we will be discussing today is what goes into running a great online or virtual tabletop game, particularly if you're used to in-person games.
Mm-hmm.
Surely we're all experts on this after the pandemic years, right?
Yes. Yeah. That was our probationary period. So from now on, you've got it down. Hello and welcome to Roll for Topic, a roundtable discussion about topics related to running role-playing games. I'm Chris Salzman.
And I'm Andy Rao.
Andy, so I've got a quick story for you, and I'm going to spare you some of the gruesome details. So last week, I managed to cut the palm of my hand pretty badly. I was washing some dishes, dropped a vase that I was washing, and kind of skip forward. Anyway, so I ended up in the urgent care, and they got me all glued back together.
I'm not laughing because it's funny that you wound up in the urgent care.
Yeah, no, it's kind of funny, right? It's one of those things where it's like, it's funny now because it's like I'm all fine and okay. Whenever anything physical happens to me, and I know I've mentioned this on the podcast before, I always think about like rolling like 1d6 damage, right? In a fantasy game. Having a very clear and present reminder of what that might actually result in real life is always a fun treat. It's like, oh, I would have 1 hit point. Like I would be the level 0 funnel character. But it also brought to mind a trope in like TV shows and movies that I absolutely hate, which is when two people are trying to like cement their bond, their relationship or their friendship.
I know where this is going.
Yes, yeah. They take out like, they somehow have this, ridiculously large knife somewhere and they cut their palms, and then like, shake hands or whatever. And I'm just like, that is the worst possible place to cut yourself.
What are you doing?
Yeah.
Cut the outside of your arm or something.
I know. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Especially like, so having like a palm injury for the past, like week or so, I'm just like, that is insane. Like, what are you doing? Like, you can't pick up anything. You're thinking about it constantly, which I guess maybe that's the point, right? Is you have to think about it and remember that great sacrifice that you made to become friends forever.
I guess so. Yeah. I have the same thought about that exact same thing every time it happens, which is, how many times in real life have you ever heard of anyone doing this in real life? Like, it just seems to happen.
I don't know. Like, I'm not a jock. I feel like this is the sort of thing that maybe like if you're into football, like you've thought about, or someone who's done.
It's just one of those, like, we all recognize the symbolism of it, but I bet none of us have done it. I mean,
yeah. If
you have sworn a blood bond by cutting your palm or something, I'd actually kind of like to know. So
yeah, I kind of would too. I mean, I sort of feel like, you could probably spit on your hand and get sort of the same, like, elemental pact with whatever deity you're trying to involve here.
Well, I know that, it's no great insight to say that injury is handled ridiculously in a lot of movies, but like, just for me, it's immersion breaking when I see someone experience an injury like that, and then the film forgets it when it's narratively needed. Like, I don't remember what it was. Someone got like shot in the shoulder, and like, think about a time you just like banged your shoulder against the wall or something.
Yeah.
I mean, it significantly hinders your ability to do anything. And the person's running around and, blood is still on their shoulder, just to remind us that their shoulder just got shot by like a high power weapon.
Yeah.
And now they're doing acrobatics and like.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. I mean, like, so I watched recently the John Wick, the third one. I forget what it's called. Like, is it Quantum of, no, what is it? I don't know. Anyway.
I did. If it had this is news to me. They have titles. Like,
I think they do have subtitles. I'm not sure what it is. But anyway, yeah. So I mean, John Wick is like the caricature of that. Like, right? Like, he's just like, taking hits and taking shots during the entire movie and seemingly like okay from scene to scene. Like, he might have like a small limp, but he can still then jump up and like wrap his legs around someone's head and flip them over. Right? Yeah. Which, good for him. He's pushing 50, maybe a little bit older than that, and he's still getting out there and being.
Well, wait until you see John Wick 4, where they invent that everyone's clothes are bulletproof.
Oh.
It's like very difficult to describe. And I mean, it's John Wick, so yes, like 100%, this is great. Like, but it's very funny watching them use their like sports coat to like shield.
Yes. Yeah.
We don't need to get into big discussion of this, but it has been long discussed that like the idea of hit points and different other ways RPGs use monitor your health is not very related to the way actual human beings work, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And speaking of injury, I had like a migraine the other day
Hmm.
that I was crippled and unable to do anything for like the entire day. And RPGs just don't, maybe it's just the stories we're trying to tell with them
Hmm.
don't want to work with the way human beings actually experience discomfort or temporary
Hmm.
disability, things like that. Have there been games that you've played or you've read about that do injury in a way that I guess that feels more right?
Hmm.
And I guess there's a lot of disclaimers here because I understand that
Yeah.
genre emulation is what a lot of games are doing, and those
Yes.
genres do not call for realistic. You cut your wrist so you can't like use your whole arm.
I feel like all the ones that I've played, all the games that I've played where it feels like it does it sort of right are the ones that keep you somewhat low level, right? That are like
Mhm.
more concerned with your power rating sort of matching reality. So like, I mean, I made a joke about like a level zero funnel, like me feeling like a level zero funnel character, but I feel like those actually have somewhat a level zero character who has one hit point in like Morkborg or something like that is very very killable, right? And like so there's something about that that I think is more realistic, even though it's obviously very high fantasy like
Yeah,
nonsense too. Yeah.
and there's that challenge. I mean, it can quickly when you create a system that causes sort of like a death spiral, and I've played
Hmm.
in games that in the name of realism attempt to do this, where you get worse the more injuries you take.
Yeah.
That's like the opposite of fun. I guess
Yes.
you have a very specific experience in mind, but
Yeah.
I like the way that Blades in the Dark and Fate and
Hmm.
various other kind of modern games, I really like filling in kind of
Yes.
consequences or kind of descriptors of the injury rather than checking off boxes.
Hmm.
And I like that you don't check how much health you have. You look to see if one of your consequences would negatively affect what you're trying to do. So if you
Yes.
wrote shot in the shoulder as one of your consequences, I like being able to evaluate then, will that affect my attempt here to fast talk the gangster,
Yeah. Oh yeah,
Uh,
totally. Yeah, like you can't quite shake his hand as firmly as you should, right? Like so that's
right.
gonna yeah give him pause. Yeah.
Exactly. And I think that invites a little bit of kind of creative thinking about what
Mhm.
does this injury, it needs to have impact because it was important enough to write down on my sheet. So what impact does that have? I
Yeah.
personally like that. I don't think I don't think it's a perfect way to model injury, of course, but
It's yeah, Blaze in the Dark does it really well because I mean I really like the conditions that you take in that game too, right?
mm,
So if your stress ticks all the way up, right, like you have to take a condition, so you don't necessarily die right away, right? In that game, you're sort of knocked out of the combat or the heist or something that you're involved in, and then you take a consequence, like maybe you're haunted, right? Like
yeah,
you are yeah, or you're like you're paranoid right from here on out, and like that is such a fascinating way of sort of like recognizing, well, I guess they're called traumas, right? Like you like kind of recognizing the trauma that would be inherent in that, but then also making it part of like the flavor of your character. If I were to ever run Blades again, I would try to go as hard as possible to get get some people with those conditions and traumas as fast as possible, because like that's where all the fun stuff I think
yeah,
lies. It's not when you're like at your most powerful and you have all of your resources. It's like when you're starting to deplete those a little bit, right? And you have to interact with interact
yes.
with some of those detriments. But I mean, could you imagine in a role playing game if like every morning after your long rest you had to roll to see whether or not your character had a migraine that day? And it's like yeah, it can. I mean, for like me and for you, like for other people that have migraines, it can sometimes feel like that, right? Like you wake up,
Yeah.
you're like, is this going to be the day that I'm just like, well, can't do anything?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So enough talk about that. I feel like if we're still going with this podcast in like 30 years, this will just be the podcast as us sort of like talking about our ailments every day,
Yes. That's
every time.
right. Yeah, except we'll be talking about our back, our joint
Yes.
pain, and
Yeah.
I tried to walk across the room the other day and I fell.
Yes. Yeah.
That sort of thing.
All the
Okay, so
yeah, the fun stuff. Yeah, so it's been a little bit since we checked in on like media stuff that we've been like reading and watching and stuff, right? So like I mentioned John Wick, the aforementioned like palm cutting stuff. I've been watching Yellow Jackets as well, which
oh,
has
yep.
has a handful of scenes along those lines, I would say,
Yes.
which is really good. But the thing that I wanted to bring up to you is, so I started reading this book series called Dungeon Crawler Carl
Okay.
recently. So it is part of this genre. I'm going to look it up because I don't want to get this wrong. Crawler. Should have done this before we jumped
Is it
on.
like RPG lit or something?
It's something like that. Yeah, lit RPG. Yeah. So it's part of this genre called lit RPG, right? So these are books that are written specifically with like role playing games in mind. So Crawler Carl is essentially a narrative wrapper around a mega dungeon that
Okay.
that the main character and his cat companion are going through. Yeah, so it is like it's this like fun mashup of all the young adult dystopian novel tropes, like sort of all put into one, right? Like to just sort of give them a reason why they need to go inside this gigantic mega dungeon with
Huh.
like millions of human players and stuff. It's really fun because since it's leaning into that sort of like that RPG world, both in computer RPGs and then also like tabletop role-playing games. Like there's stuff like there's pop-ups all the time about achievements that they've unlocked, and like whenever they get equipment they talk about like the stat bonuses and stuff. So while you're reading this story, which is mostly sort of like it's pretty frivolous but it's also pretty fun, pretty well written and breezy and stuff, you're also sort of tracking their stats and their progress as they're going through, which sounds like kind of awful like when I say it out loud, but it ends up being really fun because you have this sense of progress,
Hmm.
of progress for the characters too. So in addition to them like having revelations about themselves and who they are and all that stuff, you can also see their strength ticking up as they're going through the
Oh,
dungeon and
interesting.
fighting,
Okay.
fighting monsters.
I don't know how I have not heard of this genre.
I hadn't either until someone mentioned the book in my work, one of our work conversations, and said that it was super fun. So I just picked it up because I was like, this sounds just ridiculous enough, and just like, yeah, kind of. I'm most of the way through the second book. I think it's a relatively new term, although it's certainly a genre that's been around for a while, right? Like I think like now that I know the term, I'm thinking back to books that I've liked in the past. I'm like, oh yeah, that could probably fit, right? Like
Huh.
yeah, like Ender's Game, I feel like you could almost make an argument sort of falls into this too, right? Like it's about a bunch of games, right? Like you're sort of reading recaps of small children playing games.
Setting aside the main reason for this, which is that
Mhm.
it's a fun gimmick,
Yeah.
what is added to the experience of reading a story that you're seeing maybe the numbers
Mm.
behind the scenes, at the numbers that that define the characters ticking up or down?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think so. Again, I've read exactly one book in this
Right. So you're
genre.
an expert on the genre. So tell
Yes.
us.
Yeah. So if anyone has read more, I'd be fascinated to hear like if there's some books that are sort of held up as like the really good ones to read. But for me, the fun part about it is it sort of pushes the story to always be going on to the next thing the whole time. So in addition to going through the mega dungeon, there's some like time pressure too, where each level in the dungeon collapses after a certain number of days, right? So you have to make it down before that level collapses, or the story's over, right? So like
Yeah.
you have like this constant sense of like movement, right? Like
Huh.
it's never gonna like really slow down, and it's like okay, and now they spend a year in this one place, right? Like they're gonna constantly be moving on, finding new challenges, finding new action to work against. I mean, I personally like that, but I also am at a point in my life where you couldn't get me to read literary fiction if you if you paid me.
Right.
So yeah.
That feels to me like an evolved version of those choose your own adventure books from like the 80s that
Hmm.
had RPGs built into them. Did you read any of these?
Yeah, I read a number of choose your own adventure books. Yeah,
Okay.
but
These are choose your own adventures that are like, and it would be like you face the goblin. So
mhm.
using your stat sheet in the back, roll
Oh
dice
yeah,
to defeat it.
yeah,
And those were fun as a kid. They hold no appeal to me now, but
yeah.
and I'm not trying to trash the genre or something like
Hmm.
that. But I do wonder, there is something about the interactivity, even just passively watching those numbers tick up and down.
Hmm.
Feels like a slightly different way to engage with what you're reading in a
Yeah,
fun way. So
yeah,
I don't know. I think there's something to it. I still can't decide if what you just described sounds to me like something I would have fun reading or not. But
yeah,
I'm interested to see one. So are these
yeah.
common enough I can go to like Barnes and Noble and find one on the shelf?
No, as far as I can tell, and I poked around at this a little bit, and apparently there's some politics around this too. But like, it's mostly on Amazon's Kindle Unlimited
Oh, okay.
setup, right? So I think like Amazon will sign on writers to basically like they only publish there. So like I've been able to find these there, and then also the author Matt Dinneman has a Patreon as
Okay.
well. So like a lot of these, like at least for him, he publishes them serially, right? Like so like
Sure.
he's writing chapters and releasing them to his fans sort of like as he's going, right?
Okay.
So I think if you were like really into it, you can find find an author you like who's writing in this genre or another genre, maybe like romance or whatever, and you can kind of get like weekly chapters, right, as they're coming out. Too, which
Interesting.
is also like a whole fascinating conversation, like off to the side of this. But yeah, it's fun. I think knowing you, Andy, I don't think you would like this series, right? Despite me liking it, there's a lot of like pun based humor, which I know is not
Okay.
necessarily your thing. So
Yeah, I mean, it's not a deal killer, but it's walking towards the deal killer line.
yes, yeah. Well, I will tell you that the main character in it is Carl, who's a nice kind of tough guy, and his ex girlfriend's cat, Princess Donut.
Okay.
So that if that doesn't scare you off, yeah,
Filing this away, puns and
yeah,
adventures. Yeah, and Princess Donut the cat. Okay.
yes, yeah,
No, it's all good. That sounds delightful. I'm glad you enjoyed it.
yes, yeah.
And I
So
guess let's just watch for the first, New York Times best-selling work of great literature to feature RPG stats in the margins or something.
yeah, someone out there is like, well, 40K already has a whole bunch of novels that should be
That's
should
right.
be considered. Yes, yeah,
You know what we need is, an RPGification of great works of literature. So maybe
yes.
Gravity's Rainbow with stats on the sides or something.
I've done a run at Gravity's Rainbow, and that would have helped.
Yes,
So,
we've
yes,
all been there.
yes,
I this calls to mind. So I have in my basement the annotated Dragonlance Chronicles, and
annotated. Okay,
yes, and
yeah,
all love and power to the Dragonlance and the Dragonlance author.
mhm.
I loved it as a kid or whatever, but I got it purely because it makes me laugh every time I see
Yeah,
it. Uh, and the annotations, they live up to like what you would hope they would be, which is
okay,
like a green ochre slime is like,
yes.
so.
Oh.
Anyway.
Yeah, just sort of like the annotated Shakespeare, like that you sort of need to understand some of the cultural references.
Right, yes. This
Yeah,
kind of dragonborn was born in the south region of whatever. So.
yeah. That's great.
So
Yeah,
let me quickly share the media I've been into because the time is ticking along
yeah.
here. I have experienced a couple of RPG related things. I guess the one I want to talk about is I read Adrian Tchaikovsky. I believe I'm pronouncing the name correctly. His novel Children of Time. Have you heard
Hmm.
of this?
No, I have not.
It's one of those books that on Goodreads, like everyone I know has read it and gave it
Mhm.
5 stars, and it's just been on that to read list for a while.
Yeah.
It's a sci-fi novel. It feels very much like I always mispronounce his name, but Werner Vinge,
Yeah.
Vinge's stuff, in that it does two things that I think are interesting and have my RPG GMing wheels spinning. One
Mhm.
is it is a generational story, as this comes up in the past, as I'm really intrigued by the idea of an RPG that follows a group of protagonists or their descendants and stuff
Mhm.
like that over the generations. But this is, over the centuries, it follows. I guess you would say it's kind of on an evolutionary scale because it follows this species of creatures from their roots as simple organisms to intelligent, evolved spacefaring beings.
Hmm.
They're kind of going through this sort of artificially sped up evolutionary process. So over a couple thousand years, this society evolves into
Huh.
like a more or less 20th century ish, level of tech. I don't have any insight there except as to say it's just reignited my interest in running a game like that.
Mhm.
Something like the Quiet Year, but over generations of time.
Yeah.
On my shelf unplayed is Legacy Life Among the Ruins, I think it's called.
Oh, yeah,
It's
yeah.
like a
Okay.
post-apocalyptic powered by the apocalypse game, and I have not run it yet, but I believe it is doing something like that where you follow the adventures of one generation for a bit and the way they impact the setting, and then you move on.
Hmm.
So I don't know. The next time I'm running something kind of experimental and quirky just to try it out, I think it might be, if not that game, then something else that taps into that generational
Yeah.
thing. So
I mean, I know you've brought it up on the podcast, and I still think it's such a fun idea
yeah,
for a game. Yeah. I mean, I like just as you were talking, like, I mean, I like the idea of you just play sort of that generation until it's not interesting anymore, and then just jump to the next one,
yeah,
right? Yeah, like it doesn't have to be like each generation is a campaign's worth. of material, right? It could just be like a session, right? And then you're on to the next one.
Yep.
Um,
So
yeah.
there was one other thing I wanted to mention, and
Mhm.
so part of the other thing that was interesting about this book is that the species that it's following, the question the book asks is, what if spiders evolved into a sentient
Oh,
species instead of apes?
yeah. No, I'm not into that. Okay.
Right. Yeah, I
Yeah.
knew automatically this is probably not a book for Chris, but
Yeah.
so it follows the spiders going through the evolutionary steps of like kind of developing tools
Mhm.
and coalescing into societies and going through a renaissance, you know, that sort of thing.
Okay.
And it made me think. I have a lot of sci-fi games that I've read over the years and looked at, and a lot of them have like a create your own alien species section.
Mhm.
And so I hauled out like GURPS while I was reading the Tchaikovsky book
Oh wow. Yeah.
to just to see, because GURPS has a, you know, very comprehensive, like, you know,
Mhm.
build your own species set of rules, and those are all good. And you know, if you look at Starfinder, I'm sure, you know, Starfinder has this too. Oh, my species has extra arms, so I get +2 dexterity, and we're from a desert planet, so we have +2 survival in, you know, hot temperatures or something.
Mhm.
That feels very anemic compared to the sorts of questions that like this book was asking
Mm.
about how the experience of this alien creature's evolution would impact the way it interacts with its environment. And
Yeah.
what I mean by that is like, you know, what would it mean if your way of transmitting information was through like pheromones and scent and things
Mhm.
like that, as some of these creatures do? What would it mean if your planet doesn't have, you know, the resources to build like semiconductors and to undertake, you know, advanced information age structures? Like how would you create computers? You know, how would that affect the way that you communicate? What does it mean if your species doesn't have like a vocal system, but you tap with your legs and use gestures to
Yeah.
communicate through vibration? What I would love to see in an RPG book, a sci-fi book, is not here's the bonus you get if your alien has extra arms or if it has some sort of natural armor. I would love to see a list of like 10 questions, like discussion
Mm.
questions
Oh
that
yes.
would ask things like how does this species pass on information from one generation to the next? So like the spider
Yeah.
species, they don't have like paper, and they
Yeah.
don't really have a writing system. So the book goes into it. I'm not going to get
Yeah.
all tedious on us here. Well, maybe I'm being tedious already,
Oh, I don't. I love
but
this. This is
I would
awesome.
love
Yeah.
I would love like just 10 kind of off the wall questions that would give me, you know, and sure, throw in you know, some numbers in there, so some +2s and -2s
Mhm.
here and there to my stats.
Yes.
But what I really want is like, you know, give me a couple hooks to like role play my walking spider guy in
Mhm.
a way that's like that is fun and really plays up that like this is not a human with makeup on. It's like a creature that evolves in its own universe.
Mhm.
So anyway, I'm gonna get off my soapbox here.
Yeah. No, that's yeah. I mean, like, yeah. So as alluded to, like, I do not like spiders at all. But I mean, it does sort of raise a lot of really fascinating questions. Like you said, that they went through their own renaissance and stuff. Like if they got to the point where they were as evolved as I don't say the word evolved, but yeah, evolved as, as humans are right now, it's like, I don't know. I'm just thinking like, would they have shoes, right? Like would they have a,
Yeah.
like a political system? Like would there be like all these things that we sort of consider part of everyday life that would still exist
Yep.
exist for them? Would there be vegan like spiders? Like would,
Yeah.
it's like there's just all these questions you could ask that are very much more interesting than like can they hold a pulse rifle? So
Right.
yeah.
So anyway,
Okay.
thanks for indulging me as
Yeah.
I went down that. But I like that kind of sci-fi. So I guess listeners, if you have other things to suggest along those lines, I enjoy that kind of
Yeah. Do you think
sci-fi.
would you ever write that game up that you're talking about, or write up that character creation system? Because I think
Oh,
that would be, I mean, I would like to play that. I think that could be a fun thing to even play on the podcast. Yeah.
I don't know. You know, so the next time one of these like RPG challenge months rolls around,
Hmm.
don't miss the chance to poke me about this,
Yeah.
because I would be interested in taking a crack at that. I
Hmm.
probably need some sort of like external motivation
Yes.
to make
Yeah.
it happen. But
Yeah.
yes.
Okay. Cool. Yeah, I will keep that in mind because I think I want that. I think that'd be really fun.
Yeah, for sure. All right.
All right.
So, hey, why don't we switch over to our topic?
Yeah. We should
And
talk about that for a little bit at least. Yeah.
yeah, and we don't need to spend a ton of time on this topic.
Mhm.
I think most everyone listening to this has very likely in the last couple of years, for sure, tread
Mhm.
into the world of running online games. So, can we start by asking you, are you currently in any online games? Or after the pandemic, did you get back to face to face?
You got back to face to face. So I occasionally will go virtual, just if like scheduling stuff ends up happening. But so the main game that I'm playing in right now, we meet like once a month or so, let's say on average in person. There's one player who he's always virtual, like he's been in our, like I've been playing in that group for 8 years, 9 years, something like that. Yeah, and like
Yeah.
he's always been virtual, right? So I think I've seen him in person once, and once when he was in town. So like yeah, so in some respects I have like a lot of experience with like that being part of gaming, and I think it works really well. My GM Matt, like he spends a lot of time on props, and he makes sure that the guy who's virtual or anyone who's virtual has sort of access to like scanned version of those props, in some fashion. The answer to the question a little bit is just sort of like you have to care enough to make it great.
Yeah.
I think and I think a lot of that does also come down to translating some of the table stuff to digital as well, in ways where you're not just sort of like stuck in the VTT the whole time, right? Like I think for
Mhm.
me that's never like a great time if we're just like all in roll 20
Yeah.
at the same time. I would rather sort of have different windows open on my screen
Yeah.
when it comes down to it, because that sort of mimics like how I run games at the table too. Just like there's sort of paper everywhere, and you're like sifting through trying to find this stuff, rather than like spending all this time on organization within the VTT,
Yeah.
which is just like I don't know. Then I just feel like I'm doing work at that point.
When you've played in online games,
hmm
has the GM, and maybe this GM is you,
hmm
does the GM show up? Are you using all of the features of Roll20 or whatever? Or
hmm
are you just using the the main play space and the voice chat
Yeah,
in the character sheets?
I've run like a couple things where like I really tried to make online stuff work. So one was in Roll 20. I ran a Blades in the Dark campaign. This would have been a couple years ago, right? At this point, that you played in. And that one I tried to use the stuff. So there's like character sheets and stuff built in. That was really helpful. We had a map that we could draw on, which was helpful too. And there was still like a ton of stuff that I don't think we really touched in there. But that did facilitate, I think, play pretty well.
Yep.
Yeah, especially the digital character sheets. And then the other one I did ran a couple sessions of something in Owlbear Rodeo.
Hmm.
I like that a ton more than anything else I've seen. It's a lot simpler, and like it sort of just gives, at least for me, it really maps well to sort of the level of fidelity that I want in running a game, which is like you can draw shapes if you want to. You have a map like in front of you that you can put stuff on, but it's not too fiddly beyond that. Every time I've touched roll 20 and I try to do something more complicated, it's just very frustrating. I will say to do, because it's I don't know, like maybe I need to take some time to learn it or something. But yeah,
It's
what
funny you
about you?
should say that. So I just played in a Fate game
hmm
in using Owlbear Rodeo. I think it was Owlbear Rodeo.
Probably,
Anyway, it
yeah,
was, if it wasn't Owlbear Rodeo, it was something else whose pitch was it's just simple and minimalistic.
yeah,
And we still spent 20-ish minutes like wrangling with how come I can't see your dice, and
yeah.
why won't my note show up for everybody else, that sort of
hmm
thing. I mean, no matter how simple the interface, moving from in-person game to these virtual tabletops, I feel like there's always a layer of like wrangling with the interface.
Yeah.
That the most all out I've gone on a virtual game, I think, was the Alien
hmm
game I ran. I think you played in it
Yeah.
many years ago. And even then I wasn't using most of the options on Roll20,
hmm
but I tried to have maps and pictures of everything and all the NPCs and
hmm
that sort of stuff sorted out in advance. And
Yeah. I remember liking the maps quite a bit. I think you found a map pack somewhere, like, and that was pretty cool.
I found the map pack after I had like laboriously scanned and like cropped
Okay.
everything myself.
Yeah.
Then they put it on sale that I could
hmm
purchase. So, but I'm not bitter about that. But
Oh yeah, of course not. Yeah.
yeah, I did that experience. I did find all sorts of neat little like third party tools for like making stuff into virtual
Mhm.
tabletop friendly elements. So like I found a little app that makes you put a picture in and then you can turn it into a token by
Yeah.
picking a order and the colors and things like that. So
Yeah.
it was kind of fun to dig into that ecosystem of like
Mhm.
supporting apps to get you across that space between here I have my physical books and maybe a PDF
Mhm.
to Roll20, which is got with this its Byzantine tab interface with a million options.
Yeah, what's really interesting to me, like, yeah, talking about that and then, like, thinking about games I've run is, like, the sort of prep that I do for an in-person game is just, like, it's so different. Like, I would never think to go print out a giant map. Like, right? Like, I would never think to
Mhm.
go buy a map and get it printed out. I'm like, well, if we're in person, we're gonna draw it together, right? Or, like, I'm gonna do, like, a quick drawing. But online, it feels like you almost need some of that like extra oomph or something to like to make it work. And I don't really know what that is. Like maybe I just need to care more about my in-person games or something like that. But yeah, I think like for me, because it always feels like a bit of a lesser experience to run something online, there's a level that I need to sort of put into it to
Yeah.
make it feel worthwhile. Yeah, it's like, okay, like if we're going to be digital, like let's use some of those digital tools.
The last couple of games I've run, I have leaned more into physical stuff to play with.
Hmm.
The last few in-person games I've run.
Hmm.
And I am wondering if that is me taking away some of the positive experience I had running like Alien and Band of Blades. I tried to also lean into like having maps and tokens
Hmm.
and clocks and stuff.
Yeah.
And so I don't usually do any prep like that. But the last couple games I've run, Star Trek Adventures, I spent quite a while. I spent quite a while making a big map with clocks on it and stuff. And I am now wondering if that is because I can unconsciously trying to emulate the good parts of the online game,
Hmm.
which were like having a big map, a big detailed map that you could move around on without me having to stop and like quick pencil in
Yeah.
a crude map, if that makes sense,
Like I sort of wonder. So like the new like one D&D, right? They're working on this like crazy 3D VTT that they want to push everybody towards.
Yes.
And like for me, that has like almost it has negative appeal. Like
Yeah.
I actively do not want that. But I'm also not the sort of person who is going out and buying like the perfect dragon miniature and painting it and stuff like that. But I wonder, for those that do that sort of already blending some of that like digital stuff with their game table, if that sort of style of VTT is like, wow, this is exactly what I want, right? Like, so like we've seen pictures, or we know people that have like TVs sort of embedded into their gaming table that they can project the map onto, and they have all their minis, and everybody has like their custom one and stuff, and there's giant dragons that are getting getting thrown out there. And like that's super cool. It's like just not sort of how I play. But I think if I was used to that, that's what I'd want in a VTT too. Like I think the Owlbear Rodeo would be like, what's going on? Like I'm missing the whole third dimension, third dimension here.
You and I and probably most GMs, we're all none of most of us, do not have a giant miniature collection or a giant
Hmm.
map collection. So we are all very used to like, here's the dragon. I'm reusing this like miniature of an ogre because it's the largest miniature I have, but
Yeah.
it's the dragon. We're very used to that sort of thing. And here's the orcs. I only have miniatures for a bunch of skeletons, but here's the orcs, right?
Yeah.
Or here's a Mountain Dew can. It's the beholder.
Hmm.
It is kind of neat. In a virtual environment, it is much easier to show people exactly what your vision is of the thing they're looking at without them just having to interpret your words, or
Hmm.
without you doing that awkward thing where have you ever held the rule book up to show them
Yes.
an illustration of a monster,
Of
but you're
course. Yeah.
trying to cover up like the stats and things like that.
Yeah.
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 So I can see, I wouldn't say that is something I need, but I can see the appeal in that. Isn't it more cool if you're fighting a zombie dragon, isn't it more cool that you can put a digital token that shows an actual dragon that's a
Hmm.
zombie rather than haul out the same dragon miniature that has stood in for every dragon you've used for the last 20 years, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I can sort of see the appeal. Like that over the top like 3D thing, which here's my hot take. It looks about like Neverwinter Nights looked uh
Wow, this is
uh
hot. Okay.
like 20 plus years ago when people were using Neverwinter Nights to do this already. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not saying that to knock on Neverwinter Nights. I'm saying that to say people were doing this 20 plus years ago with Neverwinter Nights,
Yeah.
and it worked well, and it looked, man, not this good, but it looked not
Hmm.
that worse than this. So
Yeah.
okay, there's my
Yeah.
hot take.
Yeah.
Everyone go buy a cheapo copy of Neverwinter
Yeah.
Nights.
Send
I'm
all your tech support questions to Andy about
That's
like, why
right.
can't I get
Yes.
it to work right? Yeah.
That's right. Just install your IPX drivers and make sure that
Yes.
okay.
Yeah.
I lost track of where my point was, which I'm sure it was a dumb point.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think this is all pretty good. I mean, I think like, I think neither of us are going to ever embrace it 100%, like 100% online gaming. And I think that's okay. Like my gaming plans for the summer are very much like related to in-person gaming, and maybe that'll shift around like, later on in life. But like, I think especially just sort of coming out of like lots of pandemic related stuff, right? Like, it's definitely still going on, but like, yeah, for me, those in-person things are just like a little bit too valuable to
Yeah.
just shift over to digital. Yeah, so I mean, like my plans are, this summer, like I want to get a neighborhood game of something going. I've got a handful of people that said they're interested, which is cool. And then we have the con coming up too, in August as well, Roll for Topic Con. So
Yeah.
like that's sort of where I'm excited. But I mean, this conversation is making me think like maybe I should up my game a little bit at the in-person table, and maybe like pull some of that VTT stuff over into it.
That's exactly where I was going to.
Hmm.
So the most eye-opening experience I've had related to a VTT lately was in the couple months ago running my most recent Alien little mini campaign. I found some amazing person online, and I'm sure I've talked about this on the show. Some amazing person online had, for the adventure I was running, had created like an online, on a web page interface for the computer
Oh
system
yes, I
of
remember
the
this.
ship
Yeah.
that the players are exploring.
Hmm.
So I did not really make much use of this because for some of were technical reasons, and also I didn't have the time to figure out how to use it well. If I could spend time on that to get it right, so that people could use their phones to like access and click around in people in the in-game NPCs like email logs and things like that. This is a game where people had differing agendas from each other, so if you learned something from an email log that would further your agenda, you might not want to share it with others.
Hmm.
That made me think that I think what would be most fun for me is taking some elements of that VTT experience, kind of powered by the tech we use here,
Hmm.
and bringing it in the right amounts and doses into a tabletop game.
Hmm.
I think there's a lot of potential there supporting apps. But even as I say that, I'm running up against my extreme dislike of like wrangling with tech at the table, right?
Yes.
Which we also have talked a lot about. So I'm contradicting myself here, except to say that gave me a glimpse of like, this is almost a thing that would really add to my in person game. It's not
Hmm.
quite there yet. But if someone were to pitch something like that, it would be more compelling to me than a new virtual tabletop that has more whistles. There's a lot of options out there now, and I, for one, have started to glaze over when I see new exciting ones launched that, yes, indeed, they look awesome.
Hmm.
The full list of features, but it's not quite what I want right now.
I mean, I've thought a lot about like writing like custom app for whatever game I'm running. Just like, yeah, like the thought of that not working and then it turning into a tech support a tech
Yes.
support
Oh,
session is just like
yes.
so like, oh no, I don't I don't want that.
Yes.
The like, so the main game I'm playing in, like I mentioned, we have one guy who's virtual, so Matt tries to pick theme music for all of our games, which is like the best thing. Like go pick out theme music for the next game that you're doing and play it. But like we were trying to get it set up. I was one of our players was trying to get it set up so the guy in the virtual stream could hear the theme music at the same time we were listening to it, and it was just like, I don't know, like doing that is just, it's so hard to
Yes.
figure out all the little technical aspects of it, right?
It's
Like
such a simple thing, and yet it's so
yeah,
hard.
yeah, and it seems like it should be simple, and I'm a software developer, like I understand why it's hard. It also shouldn't be hard. Like it's like all this stuff where yeah, like in person you just like hit play and then you can listen to it, like, and if you're virtual then it's like this sequence of computing events, right? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, I don't know, for some people that's like a nothing, and for other people like that is deeply frustrating, so it's
Yeah.
like, yeah, finding that middle ground is tough. So
Are there non-RPG apps for communicating and coordinating that do things better than your typical virtual tabletop? I
hmm.
think because like at my employer we use Teams
Hmm.
all the time, with which is a little eye rolling, but it's got a bazillion different things that are all kind of connected to each other.
Hmm.
I'm wondering, of all the base camps and the Slacks and things like that, have any of those hinted at something that would work really well in an RPG?
Hmm. That's interesting. Yeah, the obvious thing is like, Zoom or Teams, and Teams, like those just do audio and video better than I've ever seen ever seen roll 20
Hmm.
be able to handle. Like, right. But yeah, so like there's those sorts of things. But yeah, I don't know. I'm gonna have to think about that. Like I know with Zoom a while ago, I used that for doing like a collaborative map with everybody. So we just sort of had a shared whiteboard that we annotated together, and that worked pretty well considering everything. But I think like even roll 20 has better tools.
What I like about Teams E type environments,
Hmm.
and which is not too different from Discord or any of a million other apps,
Hmm.
that it intrigues me, but I don't know exactly how it would work in an RPG. Is kind of the ongoing like record keeping
Yeah.
of what's going on, the logging of your experience, and the
Hmm.
ability to associate notes and stuff with particular experiences that you could go back. Because I don't think most online virtual tabletops I've used, the chat is curiously underwhelming in
Hmm.
its like, I mean, you could scroll back up through a big long chat thing, but what if you had, like Discord or Teams or Slack or whatever like that? What if you had encounters or conversations with NPCs kind of just archived? You could go back and revisit everything about that, and
Yeah.
even so, I don't know. I think there's something there, and I think that there's something to the ability that a lot of these apps have to kind of like assign tasks, or
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know, just that kind of arc for archival purposes. Like,
Hmm.
what have we done? What do we need to do? What do we know so far?
Yeah.
I think that that's got some potential. It also seems like something you could get lost. We just waste a huge amount of time messing with
Hmm.
instead of playing the game, right?
Yeah, the thing that I've always thought would be useful, especially if you're playing a slightly more complicated story game, is creating sort of like a map of NPCs and their relationships
Mm,
and
yep.
stuff, and having that be a shared conversation or like a shared note sort of between all the players, because I think like at least the games I play typically are like everybody sort of has their notebook that they're writing in and stuff, but like there's often times where just like I want to see sort of like the web of connections. I want the like the crazy board, right, with all the registering going between everything. Like that's what I want. Like I don't necessarily want the like, oh, and then we talked to this person and they said this thing, like
Yeah.
the transcript. I want the like the overarching connections, because I think like that over the course of a campaign, those are the artifacts that are more interesting that fall out of it, are like those sorts of things, like the broad strokes of the story. Yeah, like how people connected, like, and then I think also for the GM sort of then getting to see like what they thought they were trying to say versus what
Yeah.
what their players sort of took away as the connections between everybody. Yeah, and that to me that does seem like something like a digital something could do a good job of, and I'm sure someone out there has made great tools for it. We just don't know about it, but
Yeah,
yeah.
well, I spent a lot of time messing with Obsidian, and I specifically was intrigued to check it
Hmm.
out by looking at someone's cool video where they showed their map, like
Mm,
of connections of NPCs
yeah,
and stuff like that. I mean, if it weren't just an astronomical amount of time investment to do that, that would be awesome. But like
yeah.
in the Cthulhu game I run for some members of my family, my teenager keeps has this it's the kind of the chronicler, and
Hmm.
keeps this big journal where they tape all the handouts and they take exhaustive notes on what's going on.
Hmm.
And that's been a super fun thing that's added to the experience. But numerous times we have hit a thing where it's like I, the GM, have basically have to say, you have heard this name before.
Yes.
Go look through your notes. Yes, it was back in the Peru section, and digital tools would make that a lot easier.
Yeah. All right. Well, we should wrap up. That's
Yeah, we should.
yeah, it's been a good conversation there. I think like yeah, I was hesitant about this one because like yeah, it's something that I feel like despite having a lot of experience sort of with this divide of running games online and not like I don't have a great handle on it either. And I do think part of it is maybe just like I've never fully invested in really figuring one of them out. But it's like yeah, it's also odd in that if you told me I had to run a game online now after all the experiences and stuff and the conversations we've had, like that wouldn't be as daunting. And I wonder if that's maybe the grand success of VTTs over the past couple of years is that like they are approachable in a way that it definitely was not, five or so years ago.
It's obviously this is the way of the future, that VTTs are going to be alongside us,
Hmm.
like for the foreseeable future. And I think that helping people know how to use them to get the most out of them is a much bigger need than making sure it has like reflective lighting or something on the map, right?
Yes. Oh yes, that is yes. Yeah, it is absolutely the truth there. Yeah. Yeah, like all software, it's not actually the features, it's the documentation. So there there you
Hey,
go.
there
Yeah.
we go. All right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's quit on that note. I don't know if that was useful or interesting, but I
Mhm.
do think we are past the point of that kind of tired old. Do you rather run online or do you rather run in paper? Like, I think the future is you'll be running and playing in both environments, and you'll probably be crossing the streams quite a bit, one way or the other between them. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. All right. Well, good conversation. Yeah. So this has been Roll for Topic. We are part of the Roll for It Media podcasting network. Our sister show, The Splat Book, with John Corey and Kyle Latino, is awesome. Go listen to them. You can find them at thesplatbook.com. Yeah, we love those guys. Yeah, and I think as I mentioned a little bit ago, so for those of you who are local to Ann Arbor and sort of connected to us, we are gonna do Roll for Topic Con again this summer
yay!
in August. Yeah, super exciting. Yeah, so we'll have more details about that. Please reach out if you're interested in coming and you're not otherwise sort of connected to us on a day-to-day basis, and we will make sure that you get the information that you need for that. So that's super exciting. So I think a chunk of our summer is going to be going towards planning that and stuff. But I'm excited. I think it'll be good.
Me
This is
too.
the third year we're doing it, so it feels like now it's an institution. But
Yes.
yeah, all right. But I think that's about it. So we will be back next time. I think we've got a couple more guests and stuff lined up. I think we might do a couple like special things this summer. I don't think we're going to do like a full summer of experiments, but I think we'll do some non just talking about RPGs sort of episodes here and there. So,
Yeah, it'll be good.
well, all right. Well, I've been Chris Salzman.
I've been Andy Rao.
Remember, if your player's having fun, you're a great GM.